All right, it's 10:20. Means it's 4:20 somewhere. If you got one, spark up. All right. So after recent tragedies, that everyone is aware about, everyone's got a hot take on a solution to try and prevent these tragedies from happening again. Um, Republicans typically, want to, fortify and arm the schools, which, you know, it's a good idea. Democrats, they just want gun control. Well, I got news for you. You can put all the gun control legislation out there that you want, but you're still going to have to arm and fortify the schools. Why? Well, even if you ban assault rifles, drugs come over the border by the metric ton every month from cartels. You think they won't start shipping? Well, they probably already are, because these gangs are getting a hold of a full auto rifles somewhere. Can't buy them in gun stores. Can't get them. So it's likely these weapons are already being shipped over, and if there's some type of ban like that, the black market expands, and well, even more will get shipped over. So you will still have these tragedies without doing something extra to protect the schools. Um, a bill had been proposed by, I believe it was Ron Johnson. Uh, However, I gotta see. Well, we'll probably see in the as we read the bill who wrote it. But it's called the Luke and Alex School Safety Act, named after two of the Parkland students, which is what leads me to believe this was probably written a while back. Because I've heard that some of the family members have been trying to get it passed for quite some time now, since the incident occurred. Um, and Chuck Schumer blocked it because, he's not interested in protecting children. He just wants gun control, ban assault rifles, which, as I previously stated, you can ban them all you want. You can go out to everyone who legally has one and take it away. But they're still going to come over the border, just like the drugs that are banned. And a psychopath that wants to go out and commit a heinous act will still be able to get a hold of one and do his heinous act. So, either way, gun control or no gun control, ban or no ban, you still have to fortify and arm the schools. Otherwise, there's still going to be easy targets. So let's see what's actually in the bill. It's 12 pages. I got some water right here. I'm gonna try and read through it all. Try and do it quick for you. So let's see what we got. 117th Congress, First Session, S111, Report Number 117-29, to establish the Federal Clearinghouse on School Safety Best Practices and for other purposes. In the Senate of the United States, January 28th, 2021. Well, let's see. Yeah, they tried. Damn. Man, let me find out there's something in this bill that could have possibly helped prevent what we just experienced. Because if this bill was originally tried to push through in January of 2021. That's over a year ago. This could have been prevented, possibly. Let's see. Mr. Johnson for himself, Mr. Scott of Florida, and Mr. Rubio introduced the following bill, which was read twice and referred to the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. July 19th, 2021, reported by Mr. Peters without amendment. A bill to establish the Federal Clearinghouse on School Safety, Best Practices, and for other purposes. 1. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. Section 1, short title. This act may be cited as the Luke and Alex School Safety Act of 2021. Section 2, Federal Clearinghouse on School Safety, Best Practices. Subtitle Sub A. In general, Subtitle A of Title 22 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, 6 U.S. Congress 651 ET, okay, is amended by inserting after Section 2215 the following. Section 2216, Federal Clearinghouse on School Safety Best Practices. Establishment. In general, the Secretary, in coordination with the Secretary of Education and the Attorney General and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, shall establish a Federal Clearinghouse on School Safety Best Practices, in this section referred to as Clearinghouse within the Department. Purpose. The Clearinghouse shall be the primary resource of the federal government to identify and publish online through schoolsafety.gov or any successor website the best practices and recommendations for school safety for use by the state and local education agencies, institutions, or higher education, state and local law enforcement agencies, health professionals, and the general public. 3. Personnel assignments. The clearinghouse shall be assigned with such personnel and resources as the Secretary considers appropriate to carry out this section. Detailers. The Secretary of Education, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services may detail personnel onto the clearinghouse. Jesus Christ, man. We 3 pages in and they haven't said shit yet. This is my problem with bills, man. They got a lot of fucking... And this is just a 12-page bill. Could you imagine the amount of bullshit that's in some of them, like, multiple 1,000-page bills that they get, a couple hours to go through? Probably skip halfway through to finally actually find something. All right. Paperwork Reduction Act. Or exemptions. Paperwork Reduction Act. Chapter 35, Title 44. United States Code, commonly known as the Paperwork Reduction Act, shall not apply to any rulemaking or information collection required under this section. Federal Advisory Committee Act. The Federal Advisory Committee Act shall not apply for the purposes of carrying out this section. Clearinghouse contents. Consultation in identifying the best practices and recommendations for the clearinghouse. The Secretary may consult with appropriate federal, state, local, tribal, private sector, and non-governmental organizations. Criteria for best practices and recommendations. The best practices recommendations of the clearinghouse shall at a minimum involve comprehensive school safety measures including threat prevention, preparedness, protection, mitigation, incident response, and recovery to improve the safety posture of a school upon implementation. Include any evidence or research rationale supporting the determination of the clearinghouse that the best practice or recommendation under subparagraph A has been shown to have significant effect on improving the health, safety, and welfare of persons in school settings, including relevant research that is evidence-based as defined in the Section 8101 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. Supporting the best practice or recommendation. Findings and data from previous federal or state commissions recommending improvements to the safety, posture of a school, or other supportive evidence of findings relied upon by the clearinghouse. In determination or in determining best practices and recommendations to improve the safety posture of the school upon implementations, and include information on federal grant programs for which implementation of each best practice or recommendation is an eligible use for the program. Pass Commission recommendations to the greatest extent practicable. The clearinghouse shall present as appropriate federal, state, local, tribal, private sector, and non-governmental organization issued best practices and recommendations, and identify any best practice or recommendation of the clearinghouse that was previously issued by any such organization or commission. Man, they still haven't really said a whole lot. Let's see. Assistance and training. The Secretary may produce and publish materials on the clearinghouse to assist and train educational agencies and law enforcement agencies on the implementation of the best practices and recommendations. Continuous improvement. The Secretary shall 1. Collect for the purpose of continuous improvement of the clearinghouse. 1A. Clearinghouse data analytics. B. User feedback on the implementation of resources, best practices, and recommendations identified by the clearinghouse. And C. Any evaluations conducted on implementation of the best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse, and in coordination with the Secretary of Education, the Secretary of Health, and the Attorney General. Regularly assess and identify clearinghouse best practices and recommendations for which there are no reasons available through federal government programs for implementation, and establish an external advisory board which shall be comprised of appropriate state, local, all of them, including organizations representing parents of the elementary and secondary school students, to provide feedback on the implementation of the best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse, and propose additional recommendations for the practices for inclusion in the clearinghouse. Parental assistance. The clearinghouse shall produce materials to assist parents and legal guardians of students with identifying relevant clearinghouse resources related to supporting the implementation of the clearinghouse best practices and recommendations. Technical amendments. The table of contents in Section 1B of the Homeland Security Act of 2002 is amended by inserting after the item relating to Section 2215 the following. Notification of clearinghouse. Notification by the Secretary of Education. The Secretary of Education shall provide writing or written notification of the publication of the Federal Clearinghouse on school safety best practices as required to establish under Section 2216 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, as added by Section 2 of this Act, to 1. Every state and local educational agency, and 2. Other Department of Education partners in the implementation of best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse as determined appropriate by the Secretary of Education. Notification by the Secretary of Homeland Security. The Secretary of Homeland Security shall provide written notification of the publication of the clearinghouse as required to be established under the Section 2216 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, as added by Section 2 of this Act, to 1. Every state Homeland Security advisor, 2. Every state Department of Homeland Security, and 3. Other Department of Homeland Security partners in the implementation of the best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse as determined appropriate by the Secretary of Homeland Security. They repeat a lot of the same shit. Notifications by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Secretary of Health and Human Services shall provide written notification of the publication of the clearinghouse as required to establish under Section 2216 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, as added by Section 2 of this Act, to every state Department of Public Health and other Department of Health and Human Services partners in the implementation of the best practices and recommendation of the clearinghouse as determined appropriate by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Notifications by the Attorney General shall provide the Attorney General shall provide written notification of the publication of the clearinghouse. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Say that shit 5 times fast. Written notification of the publication of the clearinghouse as required to be established under Section 2216 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002 as added by Section 2 of this Act to 1. Every state Department of Justice. Yeah, I'm on page 9. I haven't gotten this far, but I feel like I'm reading the same shit over and over and over and over. Every state Department of Justice and other departments of justice partners in the implementation of the best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse as appropriated by the Attorney General. Section 4, Grant Program Review. Oh, maybe we actually get something new. Federal grants and resources. The Secretary of Education and Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Attorney General shall each 1. Review the grant programs administered by their representative agency, any grant program that may be used to implement best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse. Identify any best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse for which there is not a federal grant program that may be used for the purpose of implementing the best practice or recommendation as applicable to the agency, and periodically report any findings under the paragraph 2 to the appropriate committees of the Congress, states, grants, and resources. The clearinghouse shall, to the extent practicable, identify for each state, each agency responsible for school safety in the state or any state that does not have such an agency designated, any grant program that may be used for the purpose of implementing best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse, and any resources other than grant programs that may be used to assist in implementation of the best practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse. Section 5, Rules of Construction. Waiver of requirements. Nothing in this act or the amendments made by this act shall be construed to create, satisfy, or waive any requirement under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, or the Age Discrimination Act of 1975. Prohibition on federally developed, mandated, or endorsement curriculum. Nothing in this act or amendments made by this act shall be construed to authorize any officer or employee of the federal government to engage in activity otherwise prohibited under Section 103B of the Department of Education or Organization Act. And that is the end. Whew, let me get some water. All right. So, short and sweet version is basically they wanted to, get organized on discovering the best ways to protect our schools. Because they didn't have like any, like strict, all right, we're going to have one point of entry, anything like that. They didn't have none of that. However, I feel like in the year, in some changes that have gone by since they originally tried to push this through, Yeah, I feel like they could have come up with something by now. Um, I have heard some good ideas. I'm not gonna try and say that these are my own, but with a single point of entry, couple armed security guards. Um, I think if teachers have a concealed carry, which I know some do, let them conceal carry. You know, doesn't have to be open. Nobody has to know how many. It can be 2 teachers or 200 teachers that have theirs. If you leave it a mystery, that in itself is a deterrent. If it's possible that every single teacher in that building is packing, nobody's gonna come in there on some dumb shit like that. It's a suicide mission at that point. Granted, in many cases, it's already a suicide mission. But yeah, now I know there's people who are like, well, some of these, what about the officers? They were armed and this, that, and the other. Well, make sure that the people that are hired to protect these schools and work that security understand that failure to engage and prevent the threat or engage with the threat, um, you'll be charged as an accomplice. So, someone comes up with their gun and you do like these cops do and they pretty much run away. Uh, yeah, you get charged as an accomplice for everybody that person kills or wounds. If 10 kids get killed, 10 get wounded, you going down as an accomplice for 10 counts of murder in the first degree and 10 counts of attempted murder in the first degree. You know, you make it wish that they died instead of running. Um, and again, the single point of entry, obviously, the other doors that would be for emergency fire exits, those stay locked. Um, can't be open from the outside. Uh, they can be open from the inside, obviously, because you in that emergency, you got to be able to have. You can't have school catches fire. You can't have everybody all funneling to that front door. That's not gonna work. Um, and yeah, I think you know I think those two things, just letting it be known. Hell, none of the teachers even have to carry. Just let it be known that the teachers could be carried. You know, you don't have to force any of the teachers. If none of the teachers want to carry, they don't have to carry. But if, the nutcase who's plotting this shit thinks, oh shit, how many of these teachers are packing? Is it one, two, all of them? Maybe they pick a different target. Because a big part of the reason why schools are targeted is, well, you can refer to the Buffalo Shooters Manifesto. Why did he choose Buffalo? Oh, strict gun laws. I hope you met with little resistance. Most people won't be carrying. He was. Schools are gun free zones. You might have one resource officer, if that. You know. So they're easy targets for psychopaths, and to prevent future tragedies, you got to make them no longer easy targets. That simple. Um, because like I said, some people, oh, if we just ban AR-15s, we won't have any more. Bullshit. Most school shootings are actually done with handguns. Now, not the ones that make national news, obviously, but most of them are done with handguns. Um, and also, not all of them are this type of style where they just go in. And then the worst thing is, like this, he wasn't even a student there. Like he may have been probably what, several years ago. I don't know. That whole shit's weird. Um, and the more that comes out, the more questions and disgust you have. Police waiting for 19 officers, all armed with long rifles. 19 to 1. Y'all ain't go in? That's why, like I said, I believe those officers should be charged. Um, they got their kids out. Tased and pepper sprayed other parents, to make sure that they couldn't get their kids out. You know, like shit. If y'all didn't want to go in, y'all could have gave y'all shit to the parents who wanted to go in without anything. Give them their equipment. Let them go. Like, I don't know. Obviously, there's still gonna be more details that come out, so I try not to jump to any conclusions on anything until all the details come out. But like I said, yeah, something needs to be done to try and prevent these tragedies from happening in the future. Um, and like I said, Republicans have their ideas, Democrats have their ideas. Unfortunately for Democrats, their ideas won't work unless the Republican idea is implemented as well. And they probably know this, but they've always wanted to go for guns. The establishment as a whole has wanted to go for guns for quite some time. But in a country where there's more guns than people, you you're kind of at the mercy of the people. You got to get them to want to turn in their guns. And some people awkwardly, like I saw it on the news the other night. Guy in was it Tigard, Oregon, saw this stuff and took his guns to the police station to have them destroyed. Why? I mean, if you don't trust yourself, by all means, if you don't trust yourself with your firearms to not go out and commit a heinous act like that, by all means, give up your shit. But yeah, I don't like what's next. If rapes go up in your area, is he gonna cut his dick off just to make sure? Like, I don't understand that one for the life of me. Like if you just took away, especially in Oregon, that part of Oregon right now, crime going through the roof over there. And you made the news for this, so now all these people know. Oh shit, that house is gun free. You just took away your ability to protect your family. But yeah, I don't know. I wish there was a simple answer to just make all of these types of tragedies come to a complete stop. But like I said, that just the AR-15 ban, unless you disarm all the criminals and secure the border so that no rifles can make it over, yeah, that doesn't stop nothing. Um, doesn't stop anything at all. Because they're it's easier to get a gun on the street than it is in a store. On the street, you don't need a background check. You don't need an ID. You just need cash. You know, store, you need a background check. And shit, here in Washington, I am what, like 2.5 weeks now waiting on my background check. Granted, I ended up finding out that the FFL I went through kind of messed up on the paperwork, so there was a couple extra days added to my process. But still, you know, I know not every state's the same, but as far as how long the background check process goes, but here in Washington, it's 2 weeks. You know, for most people, and yeah, but I don't know. I think Chuck Schumer's a piece of shit for shooting down this bill. Like, you know, like what's your big fear that schools get fortified up a bit, these type events start going down, and then well shit. Now how are we gonna scare them into giving up their shit? I think that's what that's about. That's just my opinion, though. I'm not a mind reader. But let me know what your thoughts are on the bill, on Chuck Schumer shooting down the bill, blocking it so it can't go through for a vote, or I forgot how the block went. I just know he basically made it so that the bill's not going to pass. That's all I know. And, what are your suggestions as to how we can, like I said, ending them is like a 0%, not gonna happen. But if we can mitigate them and make them less frequent, that's a start. Personally, I think we have some cultural and people problems that need to be adjusted. Because I actually found out as of a few years ago, Canada actually has the same gun ownership numbers as we do, but they don't have half these problems. Which it's not the gun, it's the person behind the gun, like the witness from the Buffalo incident said. But other than that, y'all have a nice night. Thanks for watching. Stay blazing.